Hey, everybody. And to answer your question, Brian, we are online. I'm Jonathan Crow. I'm with Ninja RMM, and welcome back to another MSP Live Chat. As always, I've got Tom Watson. He's our channel chief advisor. How's it going, Tom?
How you doing?
And we've got our very special guest, the man of the hour, Justin Reinmuth from techrug. Justin, thanks for joining us, man.
No, I appreciate it, Jonathan. It's good to see you and Tom again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Anyone who's on the call way back, man, of course, this year feels like 10 years, but I think it was back in March. We had our first MSP Security Summit. Justin was a part of that. Before that, we've done another webinar with you. I really appreciate you coming back and answering all these questions about cyber insurance because there's a lot of questions to be answered. I think the first thing we want to do before we dive into all this stuff is I just want to explain to everybody, if this is your first time here on a live chat, this is Crowdcast. It's a platform a lot like Zoom. You use it pretty much the same way. There's a chat bar. Definitely use the chat. This is meant to be interactive. Justin's going to be dropping a ton of knowledge on you. Tom's going to be weighing in. Tom was a former MSP owner who sold his business. He's got a lot of in-the-trenches experience to share. I'm just going to be kind of the third wheel in this operation. But join the chat. This is interactive. You guys should take this as an opportunity to connect to each other too. And then if you have a question, make sure that you put it in the ask a question portion down at the bottom of your screen, because sometimes the chat can get a little active. We can sometimes lose it. So to make sure that we answer everyone's question, make sure you use that. You'll also notice that we've got polls down at the bottom, and we've launched 3 of them already. So if you get a chance, go dive in, and that's going to help guide some of this conversation too. I see that some people are filling those out already, so thanks for doing that. But to kick things off, Justin, it's been a year. It's been quite a year. So what all has changed? What are you seeing on your end in terms of after the pandemic? What's been the impact in terms of cyber insurance world?
Yeah. So from our end, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, the ransomware attacks, against MSPs, we still continue to see that trend. But one thing that's kind of interesting that we've seen, and not in a good way interesting, is that we've noticed since, and I totally get it, right, that our MSP's clients, they don't know what tomorrow brings, right? So we're seeing that the MSP's clients are tightening their budget in terms of the security and what they're willing to implement or not implement with the MSP. But the exposure from, the work from home or the, clients that have applied for government assistance or government funding, what's PPP, CARES Act, we're starting to see where the MSP's clients are getting into a situation where they're clicking on, these PPP loans that are phishing attacks that they shouldn't be clicking on, or they're not, the work from home situation isn't set up necessarily the most secure. And so we're starting to see, we've seen a huge uptick in what we call notice of circumstances. So Jonathan, that's what when we get a call like that, it's an MSP saying, hey, there's been a problem. We haven't been sued, but our client is alleging that we potentially might have messed this up. And as a result of that, we want to make you aware that this circumstance is going on. So we're notifying the carrier saying, hey, here's the facts as we know them right now. If this goes about and comes about in a year, 6 months, 2 years from now, don't tell us we didn't tell you, because if you don't do that stuff, you could violate the terms of the policy the way it's written if you're familiar, if you're aware of a circumstance. So we've seen a huge uptick in the notice of circumstance. So I think since we last talked, and even since the whole kind of COVID era started, that's been the concerning trend that I've seen with MSPs, because not only are they shouldering the burden and the liability of the ransomware attacks, but now we're adding these notice of circumstances that we're seeing where the clients are doing things they don't want to spend the money on security, and they're getting themselves in situations where they believe that it's the MSP's problem when in actuality it's not. But they're going to point fingers if they don't have a bucket to go after.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge thing. Portion of discussion that we're going to have during this call is how do you talk with clients about insurance from the get-go? But to dig into that a little bit more, obviously, I think we've all seen, especially back in the spring, there was a surge in all the phishing attempts that were tied to COVID. Phishing's on the rise everywhere. Like you mentioned, ransomware attacks, we still see those headlines all the time. I wanted to call out that we have this agenda doc that everybody should feel free to jump into. And this is a loose agenda doc. Our discussion is going to be going all over the place, driven primarily by you guys on the line. But we've got some links to some cool things here so I want to make sure I give a little shout out to it. If you scroll down to a few pages down, there's some really interesting stuff from Coveware, which is an incident response provider. We teamed up with them earlier in the spring to do some stats around attacks that did happen with MSPs, what expectations were, and what the reality was. And so we can get into that a little bit later. But I wanted to call out really quickly. In fact, I'll share my screen for this. You mentioned more attacks. It's also the damage is rising, right? Like these guys, like cyber attacks have not stopped developing and becoming more sophisticated. Obviously, this is the stuff we tell our clients all the time, right? But big concerning trend is the amount of ransoms. And maybe Justin, you can speak to this too. Coveware, again, Coveware is an incident response provider. So they're the people that you call if your MSP has been compromised. You've got clients that got encrypted. So you're dealing with live incidents. You could call these guys and they would help you out in terms of the actual containment, remediation, and in some cases negotiating with ransom. That's something that they do. So they have stats that are really interesting. And this is what we're looking at right now is average amount of ransom paid. So this isn't just like ransom demands. This is the actual amounts that have been paid. And we see that it's gone up to $178,000. That's the average for an attack. I can remember, this dates me, but back in 2016, 17, average amount was like $500 or something like that. Like this is insane. It's totally turned into a whole different thing. And then 22% of those attacks included data exfiltration. And so this is something that I'm sure a lot of people have seen in headlines where a lot of ransomware groups, to give them a little bit more bite for their demands, not only are they encrypting all the data and off dangling the decryption key, they're also saying, hey, we also have that data and we're going to publish it. A lot of them have websites now. They're publishing it online, and we're going to keep publishing more and more of it until you pay up. So definitely some disturbing trends that way. Justin, you, Tom, and I were just talking before this, right before this call, and you were saying some of the amounts that you've seen personally with your clients has been really staggering too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Again, that stuff looks, really accurate. I mean, it has been a hockey stick. But yeah, I remember, about a year ago or a year and a half ago when it really we started getting into this. The ransoms were $60,000 or $80,000, and yeah, I mean, now they're into the low to mid. Six figures. And again, I've seen them as high with our clients as $2 million.
So, I mean, that's just a crazy amount. And so that gets into one of the big questions that I think a lot of people have regarding limits and things like that. But let's back up one more time. I'm taking this kind of all over the place, but one additional trend. So we've talked about trends on the attacker side and ransomware and all that. There's also the trend on the carrier side where, because of all these things, because of ransom amounts going up, because of the cost attacks going up, the bar is being raised for getting coverage. You were saying some interesting things about that.
Yeah, and this is where, you see on the insurance side, when there's something new, a lot of carriers, if they see the ability or the opportunity to make money, right, they're going to flood the market. So, starting cyber, and Tom and I were talking before this call, it kind of came about in 2009-ish, is really where this started to become, more commonplace. But I would say, really over the last 5 or 6 years, the cyber, liability insurance has been a little bit more mainstream. And so, I think a lot of these carriers, when they first got into it, they weren't necessarily asking, I don't want to say the right questions, but they were more focused on maybe getting as many cyber clients as possible. And then all of a sudden, what happened is, I don't think that they expected the cyber extortion part of the policy to be what it is today, which is really kidnap and ransom insurance. Right. When they came out with these cyber policies. And so, you're seeing where they were asking, hey, who are your 5 largest clients and do you use antivirus and firewall? I think the carriers now are saying, the ones that still want to do it. I mean, we've seen an exodus, and I don't want to say mass exodus, but a lot of carriers are saying, you know what, we're no longer comfortable offering MSPs insurance anymore. But the ones that are hanging around are saying, okay, we're going to make the barrier to entry a little bit more difficult. So they're coming out with things like supplementals. I mean, I know for our clients, we've always done a risk assessment, but they're starting to ask more detailed questions and really trying to understand what's the environment of the particular MSP that we're going to insure. So the barrier to entry definitely over the last 12 to 18 months has gotten more difficult, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing.
Yeah, I actually wanted to speak to that. It's a funny thing is I look back at my years as an MSP owner, and I didn't require that my clients have insurance. And then it was something that I sought out. We were talking about 2009. I look back, and that's when I had my first policy. And I had to actually ask the insurance company and tell them what I was doing and have them come up with something. They kind of had to be creative. And we were talking about before this, they came back to me. They said the only ones that kind of really understood and would do this policy was Lloyd's of London. And I remember saying, isn't that the company that insures models' legs and all of that kind of thing? And I know, Justin, you had some thoughts about that, but it's changed so much now. And it's like, it's a commonplace thing that you've got to address.
Yeah. I mean, you're 100% right. It's, if we want the carriers to still offer, low cost insurance with really broad coverage and don't sublimit things like cyber extortion, meaning that instead of, $2 million, we're going to sublimit it to 250,000. Then I think, they're looking for the MSPs to be a much more qualified risk. Now, whether that means getting a SOC 2 type 1 report down the road or SOC 2 type 2 report, those things are still evolving and changing, but the questions that they're asking today, they weren't asking 2 years ago. But, again, it's true in technology, right? I'm sure the MSPs that are listening to this, the solutions that they were offering, 2 years ago are different than what they're offering today. So as things continue to evolve, I think MSPs have to understand that security equals sales. If you're not going to clean up, make sure that the house is properly protected and make sure that your clients are living up to a certain standard, then unfortunately, I think we're going to be back in this situation where the premiums are going to increase in 2 and 3 years from now. We've got to find a way to put a stop to it.
So I think we've covered kind of right out of the gate, sharing all these stats. We covered all the doom and gloom part. I think we can talk about the what we can actually do about this stuff, right? And Justin, you're such an awesome resource to have. So everybody, if you have questions about just looking at these polls, it sounds like a lot of people here either don't have coverage, maybe just got it, not really sure their clients probably aren't that covered as well. So this is an awesome opportunity to kind of take this very complicated topic and really leverage Justin as a resource, because Justin, you did an awesome job of making this stuff approachable. So let's start answering some questions. Here we've got
Ryan.
Yeah, from Pedro. So this is kind of interesting for anyone on the line who does not have coverage right now, and a lot of the clients maybe don't too. Maybe this applies to you. Pedro's wondering, is there? Would love to show the clients that we have them covered with the cyber policy that would not only cover our company but also our clients. So Justin, maybe level setting in terms of how cyber insurance works in a more of a broad way, like coverage for yourself, for your clients, what the barriers are, stuff like that. Can you give an overview there?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of cyber insurance, MSPs need to carry cyber insurance for their negligence, but clients need to carry cyber insurance for their negligence. And I think oftentimes, sometimes I'll ask our clients, go ask your client, do you have cyber insurance? And if they say no, what is their response? And oftentimes I hear, well, you're my IT provider, you have insurance, so what do I need to do? And that's troublesome, right? Because all of a sudden they're telling the MSP that if I click on a link or I do something that I shouldn't have, my negligence is going to become your negligence. And as an MSP owner, if you've got hundreds of millions of dollars of clients that you support and something happens, I don't know how you get through that, right? So, some clients will ask us, well, what conversations do we have with our clients around cyber insurance? It doesn't have to be too detailed. To me, you're the CIO of their organization. They're the CEO. If you take this to a big company like American Express or AT&T, or you pick the company, if the CIO isn't recommending A, certain security be in place, and B, if they get through that security, that there's a cyber policy that we can call someone up and in 8 or 10 hours, they'll be at our doorstep, then I don't think that CIO is doing his job. And if the CEO finds out, from his buddy company at a Fortune 500 company that your CIO is doing what in terms of security and recommending to my guy or girl isn't, that CIO is probably going to get fired. In our world, you're probably going to get fired and sued. So, making sure that your clients carry cyber insurance, to me, I think it can be properly addressed in the MSA that you use with your clients. Make it a requirement that they carry cyber insurance. Again, I think as a fiduciary responsibility of an MSP, you need to sit down with the client with everything going on and say, hey, we're going to try to secure things as much as we can, but nothing's 100% in life. And if something somehow goes wrong, you need to carry cyber insurance as well.
So Tom, thanks, Justin, for that. And I'm going to circle back around to you, Justin, and ask you for we've got some good questions from Brian saying, what exactly does cyber insurance even cover anyway? So let's get back to that. Yeah. But Tom, first, based off what Justin just said, is this something that you required your clients? Again, acknowledging this was several years ago, but did you require them to have cyber insurance policies?
I didn't. We're stepping back now, and I'm now about 5 years removed from ownership. And if you look at that on the timeline, that it's right after that we started having a lot of these incidents come up, these hacks, and this ransomware. So I actually didn't. I on my larger clients, I did have a discussion with insurance, mainly to make sure that we were going to be covered if anything happened there. But I didn't get specific on cyber requirements at that time. But I can tell you what I do now. I got to tell you, if I'm starting an MSP now, if I'm in the business planning stage, I'm talking to someone like Justin, and I'm talking about my own insurance, and I'm asking him also, hey, listen, as I put together my managed service agreements, and I'm taking on clients, what do I need to recover? What do I need to cover on that? Because this is not something where I want to be able to step back and ask them after they've already signed a contract with me, where they're going to have to extend more money out to get covered. I'm going to put that in place as I grow the business.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tom.
Yeah, and Justin, maybe we can take this opportunity to we're getting some more questions here in the chat, so keep those coming. Thanks, everybody. But maybe just kind of stepping back. I know this is a big topic you love talking about because, like all good questions, this one has an answer that is kind of well, it depends, or depends on who you're talking with. But what does cyber insurance, a basic policy, what does it cover? What's the difference between that and E&O?
Yeah, it's a great question. Cyber insurance, first of all, when you just use that term, it's still an unregulated product. So we see all the times where an MSP will say, hey, I've got cyber insurance. How does that compare, your product compared to what I've got? Well, they might not have cyber extortion, but they're calling it cyber insurance, that particular carrier. Or they might not have first-party business interruption, but they're calling it, cyber insurance. So cyber insurance means different things to different MSPs, but also to different carriers. So it's kind of I guess I would throw it back and say to the MSP community, if I were to pull 10 MSPs and say, what's your typical managed service offering look like, right? Is that going to include 2FA on email or not? Is that going to include, EDR and active threat hunting, or is it not going to include it? So, it's still an unregulated product, but traditional E&O insurance, if it's well written, usually covers two main areas: breach of contract and client data loss. That was kind of back when Tom was speaking about when he was buying insurance. That's really what that policy was protecting against. When you start talking about cyber liability errors and omissions insurance, now you're talking about network security or unauthorized access into a system. That's not covered under traditional E&O insurance. Privacy liability, protecting PHI and PII, that's not covered under a traditional E&O policy. The notification cost, not covered under a traditional E&O policy. Forensics. So there's anywhere between, again, depending on how you define cyber, there's 7 to 12 different insuring agreements that aren't included on a typical E&O policy. And honestly, Jonathan, an MSP can't operate today with just traditional E&O insurance. It's not going to get you anywhere.
And so we now I'm seeing some questions in the group, people asking about the next logical thing. Okay, get an idea about what this covers. What's it going to cost me? Right. And again, I'm sure that answer is a little bit complicated too, but in a general sense, what are we talking there? Or what are we talking about trends?
Yeah, if you just want to, if you were to ask me, what's $1 million MSP pay, I would tell you maybe $2,000, $2,100 a year. But again, it's going to vary carrier to carrier. Some carriers over the last, 12, 18 months, they don't have an appetite for MSPs. So they're going to say, if I'm going to insure you, maybe it's a $5,000 minimum premium, So, a lot of it also depends the makeup of the MSP. Does that particular MSP have a private cloud exposure? That's going to be, if you don't have that, if you have a private cloud exposure and no SOC 2 Type 2 report, that's going to be treated differently than somebody that uses a third-party vendor and shares those T's and C's with their client and charges them a management fee, right? Or what's the client profile? Are you heavy healthcare or are you heavy bakeries? How much of your business is managed service versus hardware sales? So there's a lot that goes into underwriting. I think oftentimes MSPs will say, oh, well, my MSP is X amount in revenue. What should it cost? Again, it's going to vary on how the operation of that MSP, what it looks like internally, but also, what type of clients are you supporting? I think a good exercise for MSPs on this call is go through your client database and go on hoovers.com or Dun & Bradstreet. I mean, how big are the clients that you support? Do you have $100 million under management? Do you have 200, 300, 400 million? Because according to the statistics you just shared, Jonathan, I think you said the average downtime is roughly a week. So if you got if you got $52 million in under management and they're down a week, that's $1 million per week. And even if all your clients don't get hit, let's say 30% of them, that's $300,000. And now we haven't paid the ransom. I haven't hired an attorney to defend the third-party lawsuits. I haven't paid any bricking coverage for computer hardware replacement. Like, we're over $1 million. So, we're seeing now a trend where 2 million is the old 1 million, or the new 1 million for MSPs in terms of limits, because, the days of $1 million for a $1 million MSP, $1 million limits when I say that, it's just not enough anymore. They can't get through. I mean, I think even in that report that you referenced, I think, they found that the average, that the financial damages, the average was excess of $1 million, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah, I'm going to pull this on screen too. And while I do that, Tom, just kind of curious. I know your coverage is very different, but you were mentioning you had something like $1 million limit back.
Yeah, $1 million per incident. And I don't believe it wasn't the max coverage. I think was like several million over a year. And Tom,
what you said is that back then, $1 million was right on. I mean, that's where we saw a lot of people that would do it. And but like you said, with things changing, it's just with the ransoms going up and the clients in terms of what you're responsible and maybe not responsible, we're just seeing a hockey stick in terms of what it takes to get out of these claims.
That's right.
And so I'm going to bring up this the screen again just to bounce around a little bit. Okay, so here is another post from Coveware. I'll share this link in the chat too. But basically, we went through and we were asking Ninja customers, what do you think is going to happen, or what would you be worried about what's happening? And the thing about Coveware is, again, like, they are an incident response provider. They can talk to people who aren't wondering. This has happened to them, so they get to see the realities. And to Justin's point, so we've got downtime, expectations versus reality. We asked, if you were hit with ransomware, how much client downtime do you anticipate being able to sustain before losing clients? A lot of people were saying, like, even after 1 or 2 days, people are not going to be happy. We could have a real problem on our hands. If you look at this chart, I mean, every one of the MSPs that worked with Coveware who had been affected by ransomware, and again, like, a lot of these instances were back last year when MSPs were getting compromised and all of their clients were getting infected because of it. But they had, every single one of them had at least 3 to 6 days, and you see that dragging out for some of these other people down here. So yeah, downtime could drag out. The other thing we have here is client loss, over 50% loss between 11 and 20% of their clients. And then we have the actual cost of the attack itself that's estimated. And this is what you're referencing, Justin. So again, the numbers kind of vary a little bit, but we've got over a third where the overall damages were estimated to be between 1 million and 5 million. So in terms of, like, what's going to buy you peace of mind and what's going to prepare you should the worst happen to save you from going under, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and just so one thing, Tom, and I'll let you after this. But the one thing I would bring up is that we've gotten a ton of calls where, MSPs are trying to achieve and get higher limits, but the carriers are saying they're limiting their liability and saying $2 million's it. So, the number of, $5, $10, $20, $30 million MSPs that we've seen over the last 6 months that can't get above $2 million limits, we're getting a lot of those calls. So I think, with you sharing that data, the carriers are paying attention to that and saying, okay, well, we're going to limit our liability. So they're making the availability of limits, it's shrinking.
I know I got a real quick observation here. We're talking a lot about cyber and hacks and ransomware, that kind of thing. But when I got this insurance, I got it because, I was doing less of the tech work myself. I had people I delegated to out there. I wasn't always on the jobs. And I was concerned about someone, taking down someone's servers and messing something up and not coming back up, and downtime for a client that they could equate to dollars and sue me for. And that's one of the things I want to point out to everyone. This goes well beyond just covering yourself in cyber incidents. You got to cover yourself in all sorts of ways. And so this has a lot else to it. And maybe this kind of leads into Alex's question here about loopholes and, what's covered, what's not, what constitutes a good plan versus a not good plan.
Yeah. In terms of, again, unfortunately, I've been on these tool set compromises. I've never seen like what's excluded. I think sometimes maybe clients might think, hey, that client left me 6 months into a 36-month agreement. Will the insurance company pay for that 30 months? No, they're not going to pay you for it. A couple things with the environment, Jonathan and Tom, when we were talking about, what's changed since March. Read your policy careful. What's the definition of a computer system? Because in most policies, it says owned, operated, and controlled by the insured organization. So if you're logging in and working from a personal laptop at your home, and that doesn't meet the definition of computer systems, you could get in trouble. Another thing is you might represent to the insurance carrier that certain mobile devices are encrypted. And then you go home and you're working from the home network that it doesn't have the encryption or the same setup as the office. And all of a sudden you might violate the terms of the policy. So, that's where you want to make sure that you're communicating with your agent or your agency and they understand the policy and you're asking these questions so that they can properly answer them. But a well-written policy should respond.
And so many good questions here. This is great. So
I turned off. So it's auto timer. I didn't move.
Wanted to go back and ask about. We have a question here, going back to the security assessments. And so this is something. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the types of questions that you asked, because I know something that the type of question we've got before too is. What specific things can people be doing to get those better rates or to be taken on, to be seen as being acceptable clients? Can you give a sense of the type of security assessment or any particular things that really kind of jump out?
Yeah, and I don't know. To me, the premiums are still relatively small. If you were to compare a $5 million MSP to a $5 million doctor or a $5 million architect and engineer, that's the one thing is that, Tom and I were kind of talking about this. When these policies first came out, they're bound to go up. You got all these carriers that are running in, they're giving you $800,000 policies. Every industry, whether it's restaurants or anything, you find carriers, they jump in and then all of a sudden the claims start happening because they don't have the actuarial numbers to wrap their arms around, hey, if we collect $1, we know we're going to pay out 20 cents in claims. They don't have that data. So as that keeps coming in, the carriers are going to adjust. And, I don't know if we're there yet, but I still think that these premiums for a lot of these MSPs on this call, they're still relatively, low, that if you're asking me, hey, by going out and getting a SOC 2 type 2 report, is that going to lower my insurance premiums? No. And even if it does at 10%, the policy is $2,000, you're going to save $200. I think we're to the point where the carriers are saying, hey, the barrier to entry is X. If you don't meet X, you don't get insurance. So, one of the things that I know, that we focus on and we ask a lot, and we like to see, and this, I guess this deviates a little from insurance and more into risk management or risk transfer is, what are you doing with the clients? Are you sitting down? Are you providing written recommendations? And then what are you doing with those clients that don't follow your written recommendations? Because if you aren't providing them with like critical action letters or things like that, then all of a sudden you run into a situation where the client's telling you, I don't want to be that secure. I'm not going to listen to your advice, but I want your E&O policy to compensate me when things go wrong. You can't have it both ways.
Justin, I got
you want my policy to respond, you're going to do certain things. You're going to follow this standard. These are the things you're going to do. If you do it, then a portion of my insurance, maybe you adjust the limitation of liability a little, and make it, instead of 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, right? I mean, that's up to the MSP and their counsel, but maybe you adjust it. But you can't give the impression to these, clients that, hey, you're going to be the doctor and the patient, and when things go wrong, my medical malpractice is going to come in. It's not going to end well for MSPs. And if that trend continues to happen, where not only we're dealing with the ransomware attacks, but you're also carrying the liability for your clients, my fear is premiums might not settle down anytime soon.
Yeah, I had a quick question for you. What happens? We got some people talking on here about how they've been dealing with ransomware incidents like that. What if you have had a past situation where insurance has been involved in something with one of your clients on this, and your company's named or something like that? What does this process look like then?
So are you asking me, like, if let's pick the MSP's client is an accounting firm, if the accounting firm is subject to ransomware and their cyber policy pays out, or are we talking about like a subrogation issue where the insurance carrier is coming back at the MSP saying, hey, it's your fault, we want our money?
No, I'm more talking like something happened in the past and now you're trying to get a policy or a new policy.
Okay.
What does that look different? What are we looking at for some? Maybe there's people on the call that have had an incident in the past and now they're having to get a policy.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I think, the look back period, usually the carriers are going to focus kind of in that 1 to 5 years. Once you start getting to year 4 and year 5, if there aren't any incidences, they're going to say, okay, this is why you have insurance. It's not a frequency problem. As opposed to somebody, if you're turning in a claim every 2 years, you got a frequency problem. You're going to have carriers that either A, aren't going to insure you, or B, the premium you might not be able to swallow.
So Justin, going back to the security assessments, and how, shifting over into steering this discussion about how you talk to clients a little bit more. So we were talking, a lot of this has been like, oh man, you, the MSP, need to make sure that you're absolutely covered. Insurance can actually be a pretty good tool for you too, in terms of like this is going to make your clients do something, like if they want to be covered, or it's another tool for you to use. Like, you're not just saying, in terms of selling your services, you're selling additional security. You can come back and say, I'm doing this because of insurance. It seems like another tool that way.
Yeah, I think, two things is, a lot of time the MSPs, when you fill out an insurance application, you're making representations to the insurance carrier that you're doing X. One of those things might be, hey, we're doing, MFA on our backup platform, or we're doing something for the client. So if you're sitting down with the client, it needs to be a team approach, right? Remember, you're their CIO. So we have to do certain things to comply with the policy, right? I'm representing the carrier that we are doing certain things. If we don't do certain things and something happens, this policy may not respond, right? So, using insurance that way will maybe kind of help push the client to go and take out that 2FA on email or whatever they've been fighting with you. The other thing, I think, a good revenue generating activity for these MSPs are cyber carriers now are getting tired of their clients relying on a policy to be the only source of protection or remediation. They're now going and saying, hey, listen, you know what, Mr. Law Firm, Mrs. Accounting Firm, you don't have certain things in place, you don't get cyber insurance anymore. So I think a lot of times by pushing cyber, the carriers are doing some of the work for the MSPs, saying you have to achieve certain things in your security hygiene in order to keep this policy. If those things aren't in place, your rates are drastically going to increase, or we're just not going to offer you cyber insurance. And so I think the carriers are kind of help pushing along that argument. But I still think that MSPs have kind of a fiduciary responsibility to sit down with these clients and say, hey, in this environment, nothing's foolproof. You want to be able to pick up, call the insurance company, and in a couple hours have somebody on your doorstep to work on remediation and do that sort of stuff, and that's the conversation. Because if you don't have it now with them while times are good, when things go bad, you might have it in a deposition when things aren't so nice, and you got attorneys on the other side that are there to kind of take down your MSP. And that's the situation I don't want you to get in.
So we see, I'm actually interested, there's a comment here from Gilberto. There's not education for clients and MSP. This is the first webinar I know on the topic. Maybe I'm misreading this, but I wonder if that's to mean providing help in terms of getting MSPs the information they can pass on to clients to educate them around cyber insurance. And this ties into one of the first questions we got, which was, are there any conflicts in advising a client on what cyber policy you should have? Justin, I know you have thoughts and opinions about that, but basically just to kind of step back a little bit, should like advising clients that cyber insurance for them is a good thing? Seems like absolutely yes, right? But then there's a line, right? Like you would advise a line in advising what types of policies, steering them in a certain direction.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think this needs to be a 3,000 foot level conversation, right? You need cyber insurance. Oh, what type of cyber insurance do I need? You need to get with a trusted local agent, broker, qualified risk manager to determine that, because I don't want MSPs to get in a situation where they're caught in that, hey, you recommended this type of cyber insurance, right? They're potentially taking on insurance agent E&O, and their MSP tech policy is not meant to respond like that. So you'll see exclusions in there. You can't act like a doctor and treat patients medically, right? You can't design bridges and act like an architect and engineer. But one of them in a lot of the policies is you can't act like an insurance agent. I mean, the definition of professional services is clearly defined in these MSP E&O policies, and they'll give you like consulting and backups and that sort of stuff. But it will have exclusions for things like insurance. So I think that just needs to be a high level conversation. And when the client starts asking detailed questions, that's where you ask them to bring in a qualified insurance agent or risk manager to answer the questions. Because I think at that point your job's done. Hey, I told you the security you need. I told you the cyber that you need. What else do you want me to do? And I think MSPs need to do a good job, or make sure that they're putting themselves in a defendable position in court, because if we're not documenting these things, or these are all done over phone calls, or you're getting in situations where you're letting clients just too much be the doctor and the patient, right? It's going to get you in trouble. And a lot of times it happens on those written security requirements where they're not putting them in writing and getting critical action letters in front of those clients. So I guess going back to your original question, I would keep the cyber liability conversation at the 3,000 foot level. Once they start getting in the weeds, hey, listen, get with somebody that's qualified to determine A, what limits you need, and B, what insuring agreements you need.
Yeah, I just want to point out too, we have some other people tuning in from Facebook Live. Thank you all for joining us. And we're getting some various questions too. A lot of what we're going over here is somewhat specific to the US. I know there's some people from outside the country. And I also want to tell people, Justin's here and he can talk to you about insurance. I always recommend get a couple different quotes, but he is an expert and can talk to you about policies. But Ninja actually is not going to be selling policies or anything like that. It's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, but this is more just to educate everyone on what you should be looking for and expose you to an expert like Justin who can kind of take this conversation a little further.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Tom. That's good to point out. And I just see, Alex, you've been super active in the chat, and I wonder if you would be interested in coming on at all. Ray said that he would totally buy Ninja's policy.
I'm glad I got Ray sorted out on that one.
He's our first customer. That's great. Yeah. But Alex, if you're interested at all, it'd be kind of cool to get your take just on how those conversations with current clients have gone, because this goes back, Justin, we were talking about how Tom and I, the last couple of chats, all around pricing and having those conversations with clients that way. Any kind of conversations where you're basically like, it's one thing to do this right at the outside, at the onset of a new client relationship, but doing this with established relationships, I can imagine being a little bit trickier. I mean, Tom, do you have any thoughts about that in terms of suggestions for getting these conversations going, a natural point to do so with established clients?
I mean, yeah, my thing is that I'm going to show them some of these risks. I think you already put up some good things, and there's enough out there in the media, but I'm going to have to come back to established clients and say, hey, listen, I'm going to make it very clear. I'm not trying to sell you something. This is a protection you need to have and what it does for your business. And that just going forward on, maybe the contract renewal date or something like that, you're going to have to carry a policy that has these certain level of coverages, because this is how we're operating.
Well, and I think one thing, Tom, that you brought up is a great point. Like, things change, and so, if you want to, I always tell clients, blame insurance, right? I just went through my renewal process. One of the things they asked me was, do you have an updated contract with the client? If I don't have this, I could potentially, again, you got to go back to the we conversation. If we don't have this in place and the insurance doesn't respond, I don't have $1 million sitting in the bank, so we're in trouble. We've got to get an updated agreement. I've got to get it on file because this is a representation that I made to the carrier. So, things change. Again, MSPs weren't offering certain solutions today 2 years ago. And so I don't think it's, I just went to the dentist the other day. They made me go through all these things for COVID in order to get treated, right? I mean, that wasn't, available, or they made me do it a year ago, but they had to do it to comply with their insurance. I mean, I think your professional services clients, they get it, right? Accountants have to do things to comply with their professional liability. Architects have to do, doctors have to do. I mean, heck, even in our personal life, if you buy your significant other a piece of jewelry, you don't get it scheduled unless you give an appraisal. If you go buy a house that's on the beach, you don't get a mortgage from the bank unless you get flood insurance or hurricane insurance. You know what I mean? Like there's stuff you have to do every day in not every day, but there's stuff yearly that you have to do in life to comply with insurance. So I don't think it's a foreign conversation to say, hey, to comply with my insurance, I have to do A, B, C, D, and E.
Now, Justin, could I say something to a client? Like, I could go to a client that I've had for years and say, listen, I've got to have you acquire insurance, and I've got Justin over here. He's doing my insurance, and he says I need to have my clients do the following. Could I then say something like that and point them to you? I mean, does that seem like something that would happen?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that. I've always said to clients, because one of the questions we have is centered around contracts. Is techrug will ask our clients, do you use contracts with 90% or above of your clients, right? So when they say yes, again, you're making a representation that you can go back to the client saying, hey, I said we'll have this agreement. And I've always told clients, our MSPs and even my staff, if your client says, hey, I don't want to do certain things, but yet I want your insurance to be available, I would be more than happy to talk to them on why, certain things are important and why representations to the insurance companies are important. And I've offered it out there. Just have your clients call me. In 10 years, I've had none of their clients call me.
Well, to be honest, I mean, you told me that. And just so you guys know, I owned an MSP until, hey, Justin, how you doing?
How you doing, buddy?
I owned an MSP until about 2 months ago. And Justin was my insurance carrier, and he told me exactly that. And all I had to do was tell my clients, my insurance company requires it. And 100% of them backed down and went, oh, I get it. Insurance companies suck. And Justin's advice to me was make the insurance company the bad guy. Like your client doesn't have to have a relationship with your insurance company. The same way that as my MSP, we would go to our client and go, look, your software vendor is not giving you enough security in your software. Tell them your IT guy's a jerk and is demanding this. Go play the victim here. You don't have to be the bad guy. I can be the bad guy. Do the same with your insurance company. Like, make them be the bad guy, maintain your relationship with your client, and you'll get more of what you want or what you need.
Yeah. I mean, Alex brings up a great point. I mean, the two things I always feel like clients are safe on is if you're pointing to a higher authority. So when you're sitting down with your client and saying, hey, we've got to follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. Well, why do we have to do that? Because the government tells me that I need to be doing this. If you got a problem, go contact the government, right? Or my insurance company, they're telling us that we have to do certain things. Well, if you got a problem, here's my insurance company's phone number. If you point to a higher authority, in court, when we get to court and the lawyer on the other side says, well, hey, Alex, how did you come up with that standard for your client? And you say, well, I was following the NIST cybersecurity framework. You're safe, right? I woke up one morning and I thought that these 5 things would be good for my client. That doesn't go well, And same thing with the insurance, if you're pointing and saying, hey, listen, I have to do these things to comply with the insurance policy. I mean, we as a team, we want my insurance to be there in case I screw up, right? I mean, that's why I carry it for negligence. I don't think you'll find much pushback from your clients. And I'm glad to hear that Alex said, what we were talking about is true, that 100% of his clients, and maybe it might not be 100 all the time, but I would imagine 90% of your clients are probably going to say, those darn insurance companies, I mean, I get it. They make me do X if I have a trampoline or a dog, So you have to do something. And I'm glad to hear that those conversations go well, Alex.
Well, and the other thing was you gave us verbiage to use in the event that they chose not to, sign up for insurance or do something that was basically an exclusion that says, hey, I recommended this and you've not taken my best advice. And that's the other advice, is make sure that folks follow that recommendation. So, when a client refuses to do what you told them, whether it's use encryption or, follow any one of your best practices, including getting cyber insurance, get something in writing that says that you told them they should do it. CYA.
Yeah. And one thing I saw the other day was kind of cool. An MSP was showing me on their statement of work. They had listed basically all the services that they offer. So, it was rather lengthy, but what the client could do was kind of check the boxes and say, okay, well, I want, managed backup or whatever it was. And they offered all these different solutions. But then at the bottom of the statement of work, it basically said, hey, you've elected that it said something like, we've offered you all these services. By electing the ones you chose, you're releasing us of any liability. If you didn't go through the security awareness training, you get tricked into doing something you shouldn't have, So I thought that was a pretty good, it was a well-written SOW, statement of work.
What one thing's coming to mind when I see this, I see some of the comments, people aren't always requiring clients to have it. My concern would be if I didn't require them and that kind of hack, something like that came through them and then it affected me in some way. And so I'd be worried about letting clients kind of choose what they're going to do or not do when it comes to insurance, because I think this could kind of, we think about hacks coming through like an MSP down or hitting just a client. But if it gets to that client's network, you could possibly be exposed yourself. And so I'd probably be requiring coverage, not only myself, but all my clients as well.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Tom. And the other thing you're right is, imagine if that client falls victim to a $300,000 claim and they don't have $300,000. Whose cherry tree do you think they're going to come pick on?
Right. They're going to come at you. They're going to look wherever they can get the money from. They're going to.
Yeah, everyone's friends when things are going great. But trust me, I've seen golfing buddies, Rotary Club buddies, best friends. They don't talk anymore.
We got Kristen on now. Great.
Yeah, Kristen, thank you for joining us. Yeah, so you're going through this process right now, right?
Yes, I just realized, honestly, that I didn't even have it, that it was something completely separate from the general liability. So my best friend actually does insurance, and he sent me over the actual policy. So I'm looking at it right now, and it's kind of interesting because there's different options for it's technology errors and omissions liability. I just opened it, so there's a lot of stuff here. I don't know if there's anything I can read that would be helpful.
Well, maybe even just kind of part of the process with have you been gone through like an assessment, or is there anything else that they're requiring of you, or are you in early stages where they're just giving you over a quote?
And sorry for my shoe rack and cat.
Don't apologize.
I'm gonna say
Yep, this is me, my natural element. No, so they just told me that they're also requiring general liability included with it, but that's about it. There's no nothing else. You just kind of sign up and get it.
Well, Justin.
That to me, just to let you know, is it Kristen, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that type of, and this is where I get a lot of people like, oh, insurance companies don't cover anything, right? Well, to me, it scares me a little that the process was easy. So in other words, and without reviewing your policy, my fear is that they're putting like a failure to backup exclusion, or they're going to put exclusions in there that will prevent the policy from paying. So they're going to say, hey, you could get a policy. The barrier to entry is pretty difficult. Oh, but you didn't read exclusion 96. We told you that we don't cover any of those claims. So that's the part I worry. If the barrier to the qualification to get that policy wasn't that detailed, that would make me a little bit nervous.
Are there any?
And one of the things that we had to go through when we did it with techrug was the assessment. I mean, what was that, Justin? 110 questions or something ridiculous like that. I mean, it's a pretty detailed. It's a detailed process, a detailed assessment of what are you doing in your MSP to protect the insurance company so that they know that that you're a good investment for them.
Well, what about this, Justin? Are there any questions that you think would be like? That you would advise Kristen to ask at this point, or anything that you think she should, now that you got the policy up right now, anything that you think she should look for?
Yeah, make sure it obviously has cyber extortion. Make sure there's no exclusions for client data loss. They'll use words like replace, duplicate data, because when I ask clients, what are the two things that keep you up at night? 99.9% of them give me a ransomware attack type example, or they'll give me a client data loss backup didn't work right. So, on that ransomware attack, you got to make sure that you've got coverage for the ransom, which is the cyber extortion. Make sure that you've got coverage for forensics, for PR, for bricking coverage, which is computer hardware replacement. Making sure that you've got coverage for your first party business interruption claims, any system damage to yours. So, sometimes some of these carriers will stop at the cyber extortion, and it's like, well, when that domino falls over, it's got to hit 4 or 5 dominoes. And if you don't have another domino to hit, i.e. forensics, PR, things like that, then you get yourself into hundreds of thousands of dollars that you got to self-insure. And I just wouldn't want to see you do that.
Okay. So actually I'm noticing, because he's my best friend, he went ahead and filled out everything for me. So all the questions and everything,
Okay.
he did fill that out. So I guess it was easy for me. I do see something here that's kind of interesting. It says professional liability exclusion computer software.
Okay. So, I'd have to, again, read that exclusion,
Okay.
but maybe the software exclusion is saying, hey, if you implement or install software and something happens to it and it goes wrong, we're not going to cover that claim. So again, that would be not an exclusion that you're going to have to, in all policies, you're going to have to live with certain exclusions, Sure. It happens, but, the exclusions should be, in terms of, the severity of the exclusions, a lot of the exclusions should focus on, like, if you knew you had a claim and you didn't tell the insurance company before you applied for coverage, that's not covered, right? Or is you as an owner or officer of the company, if you do something intentionally, that's not covered, but we'll cover a rogue employee. So, or if there's what we call an employment practices liability, if there's a sexual harassment, wrongful termination, discrimination lawsuit, we're not going to cover that. There's just going to be exclusions that are going to be in the policy, but, they shouldn't be that severe.
Right.
We have a question here from Brian. How fast can the funds be available? Or is there going to be an inspection by the insurance company? All that sort of thing. Is that something that's typically laid out in the policy? Yeah,
when these, I assume we're talking about a ransomware attack, but when that happens, they're generally pretty fast moving at the beginning. So, and again, this is just my experience, within hours, you're going to be on the phone call with remediation companies, breach counsel, forensics people. So at the beginning, it's going to move really, really fast. So, in terms of, I think the question was, is the insurance company going to try to inspect it or something like that? At the beginning, they're probably not going to take the time to say, hey, listen, was the patching, updated or implemented or something like. They're going to kind of react to it real fast. And then if somehow, some way, again, I've never seen this for our clients, but you violated the terms of the policy, that would probably rear its ugly head down the road. It's not going to happen within the first couple of days. But again, I want a preference. If these policies are written correctly, they do really good things to help protect MSPs. The complaint that I've always, and it's not necessarily a complaint, but sometimes the expectation from the MSP is that these are going to cover more business interruption than what it actually covers. In other words, the insurance company, but this is true with a restaurant. If the restaurant burns down and they build the restaurant and patrons are welcome to come back in, the business interruption stops. So once your MSP is up and running, the business interruption stops. And I think sometimes when I've been on these claims, MSPs will expect it. Well, they want the business interruption to go on longer than what it should be. And so, again, it goes back to, when we talked about insurance is important part of this policy, but you also have to protect or focus on risk management and risk transfer techniques. If you're not going to do protection, insurance, and contracts, and you're just going to focus on one of the three, it's probably, in my opinion, it's not going to end well.
Yeah. So, Kristen, having this policy in front of you, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of point out, or any questions that you had based on this conversations too? Sure.
So I was kind of looking at it, and it says exclusion of certified acts of terrorism. So most of our friends that are doing these kind of breaches are usually not in the US. So I'm just kind of wondering about that. Is that normal terminology?
That's a great question. So there should be a carve back, and they should define terrorism not as cyber terrorism. So thinking more of like war. Now on the carve back in the cyber terrorism, there is going to be an exclusion that if you're doing something and you put out there, let's say on Facebook, you put out that I prefer one political party and not another, right? If you start getting into, as an MSP, publicly putting out their like ideological, religious, political views, you can violate the terms of the policy by doing that. There was one, and it was a casino owner out in Vegas, but he had said something that was against like a religious group or something, and that he got attacked, and his cyber policy actually didn't respond because he had made some comments that basically enticed someone to attack him. So, that carve back should basically tell you that it's not going to respond to it if you're going to put out political, ideological, or religious things, but you should have a carve back for cyber terrorism.
Okay, great. That is helpful. And actually you can purchase it, but it's the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act.
I'm sure you can probably purchase everything, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think, Krista, just to let you know, the terrorism, I think they're referring more towards the war and that sort of stuff. Again, there should be a carve back that says terrorism does not include cyber terrorism. And then when they give you a definition of cyber terrorism, it's going to explain what it is, but there will be an exclusion for ideological, religious, political type stuff. If you do that as an MSP owner and you put that stuff out there, the policy probably won't respond.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Justin.
Absolutely.
All right, and Kristen, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to let you go back, and we're actually coming right up on the hour, and I'll make sure that we get to all the questions here. But Kristen, thank you again.
Thank you.
And Alex, I'm going to let you go on unless you have any other final sign off from you, sir.
No, I don't think so. If you guys haven't already checked it out, check out techrug. Justin, as you guys have already learned, is an amazing resource in this space, and just hats off to you, man. You've been awesome for me when I had my MSP.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate the kind word, Alex.
Yeah.
And Alex, before you go, actually, this gives us a time for a very, very, very quick plug. So our next live chat, which will be a couple weeks from now, it'll be back on a Thursday. So it's October 8th. We'll send you all the information for it, of course. We're going to have Alex come back on. Alex is, you heard him mention, he sold his MSP, but he's the CEO, the founder of a company called Lifecycle Insights. And we're going to have him on to talk about, him and Tom are going to trade war stories about sales. And we're going to give you some really cool giveaways in terms of building out your sales process. So that's just a quick plug for that. But yeah, so Alex, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Alex.
And yeah, I'm going to make sure that we've answered any questions. This is kind of like last call for that. I'm going to go down the questions here, and I think we've covered them. But Tom, anything else that you do in this conversation? Like you go back to all the time, if you were going to start an MSP now, anything on that bearing that you want to bring up?
I think we're going to have to take the Ninja MSA, Managed Service Agreement we've been talking about, and add something in there about a cyber, some type of insurance, things that I require if I'm doing business with you. But yeah, I like to talk about if I build another MSP someday, and I just look at the chances, and we were talking about this before. There's even a hint of some type of intrusion, a hack or something like that. It's going to shut down your MSP. If you get hit or a client gets hit really hard, they're going to come after you. And I just feel like right now, if I'm starting an MSP, I'm going to require any client I do business with to have some level of cyber protection. And I'm going to have a pretty beefed up policy for my business that covers me now, that also looks forward to be really scaling that business up, and not having to kind of figure that out as I get bigger. I'm going to try to really put some energy into that. I just look at it, and the alternative is it could take your business down. It could also take you down personally pretty hard financially if you don't have this covered.
I think Tom brings up great points, and he's probably a great resource because he was in the community and, he gets it. So, I think what he just said was kind of spot on.
And Justin, we've had several people in the chat who have asked, how do they get in touch with you? We've also got people singing your praises, which is awesome and well-deserved. That's why we've got you on for sure. You're an awesome guy and you provide a great service. If people, obviously, they can go to your website. Do you want to send out anything else? Is that the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, Jonathan, I think, you have all of our contact information.
Yep.
If not, I can supply it. But, I really, like I said, I didn't come on this to do, with Ninja RM in hopes of getting all this business. I just feel like being part of the community, if I can prevent 1, 2, or 3 MSPs having to go through a ransomware attack, or what some of the things that I've had to gone through with my clients, then I've done my job. So, I just hopefully want that they can use this knowledge. And even again, if they can pick out a couple things from our conversation and it puts their MSP in a better position, then I think we all did our job, because we're all in the same community.
Well, that's very that's exactly the attitude that we're trying to provide here, and yeah, you're very generous with your time. I appreciate it, sir. Tom, always great to have you on, and thanks everybody in the chat. This has been a great conversation. If there's any other questions that come up, I am going to update this Google Doc, this agenda doc. This is something that you guys can keep. I'm going to update it with a few more resources based on this conversation. And Justin, if you're cool with it, I'll drop your email in there too. So you can reach out to Justin with questions. And then I'll also provide some info for, you can use that doc to access the recording. The recording is going to be available. We'll mark this session over within a couple minutes. You can just refresh the window. You'll be able to watch the whole thing again, relive it in all its glory. And in the meantime, everybody, unless there's other questions, I think we'll sign off and we'll see you in a couple weeks. But Justin, thanks so much again for your time. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, Tom and Jonathan, I appreciate you guys having me. It's great seeing you guys again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tom.